Edward's big Christmas treat. It was Christmas on the island of Sodor, and all of the engines were working very hard, delivering all their last-minute goods and passengers to their destinations on time. That was when, later on that evening, Edward was finishing up dropping off his last passengers for the day at Brendam docks. Edward could see that there was a whole group of people. "What's going on?" Edward asked. "These passengers are going home for Christmas," said a foreman to Edward. Edward smiled. "Ah, Christmas," said Edward. "It's truly the most wonderful time of the year." Just then, a few minutes had gone by. The passengers began to board the ship. But the ship never left. The passengers got off, feeling very miserable. "What's going on?" said Edward curiously. "The ship can't leave," said a passenger. "We can't make it home for Christmas," said another. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Edward kindly asked to the passengers. "I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. Christmas is ruined for all of us," said a passenger in a sad tone to Edward. Just then, an idea flew into Edward's funnel. "Meet me at Lower Teignmouth Station tomorrow. There's something very special," said Edward. Just then, the guard blew his whistle, and it was time for Edward to leave. That was when, later on that evening, Edward came into Knapford Station to tell Sir Topham Hatt the news. He was worried that Sir Topham Hatt hadn't heard. "That's it, Edward. Tell the other engines about those passengers, that they will have so much to do, they'll meet on that boat before they know it. In addition, tomorrow is the annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Vicarstown," said Sir Topham Hatt to Edward. "Oh, yes, sir," said Edward excitedly, as Edward chuffed off to go and tell the other engines the news. Then, later on that evening, Edward came back to Teignmouth Sheds to tell the other engines his idea on how to help out those passengers. Gordon was not too impressed. "Oh, Edward, tomorrow is Christmas. I need my rest, you know," said Gordon pompously. This made both Thomas and Percy cross. "Fine then, Gordon," both Thomas and Percy said together. "We'll do it without you. We don't need a big puffed up engine anyway," the two small engines said. After Thomas and Percy spoke up in defense to Gordon, Thomas and Emily were both concerned. "Although," said Emily in a calm voice, "we will need more help," Emily told to Edward. Thomas agreed with Emily. "Emily is right. We may need more help, because there may not be enough of us. But Edward, what should we do for those passengers? I feel really bad for them," Thomas said to Edward. As Edward looked at all his friends, "Well, Thomas, Percy, Emily, and Gordon, I know what we should do. We should split up and tell all the other engines about our plan to help out those passengers," said Edward to Gordon, Emily, Thomas, and Percy. And so, with that, Edward, Thomas, Percy, Emily, and Gordon all split up to go and tell the other engines their plan on how to help out those passengers. Percy and Emily went to the Duke and Duchess of Boxford's summer house to tell Gordon, as Edward made his way to the narrow gauge railway to go and tell the Skarloey engines. As Percy and Emily went to go and see Spencer at the Duke and Duchess of Boxford's summer house, Edward came to see Skarloey and Duke. After Edward explained about what happened to those passengers, Skarloey sighed and told Edward what's been happening on their railway. "Gee, Edward, we would like to help, but the snow is much worse on our line," said Skarloey to Edward. Duke spoke and told Edward as well. "Duncan is the only engine that can plow through this snow," said Duke to Edward. Feeling defeated, Edward chuffed sadly back to Tidmouth Sheds. After all the engines tried their best to tell the other engines about their plan to help the passengers, Emily was very cross. Spencer said he can't help because he's too busy with the Duke and Duchess of Boxford, Emily said crossly. Thomas sighed and looked down at his buffers. "There isn't enough of us," Thomas said sadly. Edward sighed and agreed and looked down at his buffers as well, feeling that he let down those passengers. "Well, we tried our best. I feel bad for those families, but let's get some sleep," said Edward to Thomas, Percy, Gordon, and Emily. And with that, one by one, Edward and the other engines fell asleep. Then, the next morning, Edward collected a few passengers and went to Lower Tidmouth Station. As he was making his way there, Edward's heart sank. But not for long. As he saw Skarloey pulling in with some brand new clean coaches to take the carolers for a ride in the evening. "We helped out to clear the snow to help out these passengers for their very special day," Skarloey said in delight to Edward. Edward smiled from buffer to buffer. He was now glad that Skarloey had come to help out those passengers make this day extra special. Meanwhile, at Knapford Station, Sir Topham Hatt and the Duke and Duchess of Boxford had a special job for both Gordon and Spencer. Sir Topham Hatt spoke to Gordon first. "Ah, Gordon, I have a special job for you. You will be taking those passengers on a special express alongside James. James will be helping you out," said Sir Topham Hatt proudly to Gordon. "Oh, yes, sir," Gordon said. Then the Duke and Duchess of Boxford spoke to Spencer. "And for you, Spencer, you will be taking us on a special tour alongside Gordon with his special express," said the Duke to Spencer. "Oh, it will be lovely," said the Duchess. Spencer beamed from buffer to buffer. "Oh, yes, sir," Spencer said to the Duke. And with that, Spencer, alongside James and Gordon, both puffed out into the night to give the Duke and Duchess, plus those passengers, a very special tour of the railway. Before the tree lighting ceremony took place, Spencer and Skarloey gave the passengers a special tour of the railway as well. Skarloey enjoyed giving the passengers a tour of the Skarloey Railway long into the night. And so, later on that evening, it was time for the Christmas tree lighting ceremony. All the engines were gathered. Edward came just in time to see the tree lighting unfold. Thomas had finished being all decorated for the special occasion. As Sir Topham Hatt spoke to all the engines, including the passengers they helped that day. As Sir Topham Hatt cleared his voice, "Ladies, gentlemen, and engines, this day is dedicated to a big group of passengers who couldn't make it home in time for Christmas. So we tried our very best to give them a Christmas treat that they'll never forget. Edward, it was all thanks to Edward, and I arranged for the day to be extra special for them. Sir Topham Hatt proudly announced, as all the engines began to cheer. And now, let's let this tree light up the sky, Sir Topham Hatt proudly announced. And with the flick of a switch, the Christmas tree was on. All the engines were in awe at how beautiful it looked. All the passengers that Edward had helped that day began to cheer. Spencer gave a slight smile, looking at the tree, and he spoke. You know, Gordon, this was truly a great idea by Edward, Spencer said to Gordon. Gordon smiled and agreed with Spencer. Indeed, Gordon told to Spencer. As Thomas smiled and spoke to Edward. Edward, this was truly a great idea to help these passengers' Christmas spirit, said Thomas to Edward. Edward looked at Thomas and smiled. Well, Thomas, it is better to give than receive, and this was our very special gift to these passengers, said Edward to Thomas in a wise voice. And so, later on through the night, all the engines and the passengers that they helped sang Christmas carols and enjoyed the Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Vickers Town Station.